Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
Let me ask you something straight, without sugarcoating or fluff. How much is your peace of mind worth when the people closest to you treat it like a bargaining chip? Because mine, apparently, had a price tag. $6,000 a month. That's what I paid just to keep one woman in my house from turning every damn day into a circus. And let me tell you, what I lost in the process wasn't just money. It was my patience, my sanity, my self-respect, and slowly, bit by bit, the woman I used to be. I wasn't always this bitter, believe it or not. I used to believe in being generous. I thought doing the right thing meant giving even when it hurt, supporting family no matter how twisted the strings got. I used to think that if I loved my husband enough, I could learn to love his family too. I was dead wrong. Because let me tell you something real and raw, the higher you climb that moral ladder, the easier it gets for people to look up and spit in your face. And that's exactly what happened to me. Mark, my husband, was always the quiet one. Soft-spoken, gentle, never a man to raise his voice or shake the ground. At first, that felt like comfort, like I'd found someone steady in a chaotic world. Turns out, it was just someone who wouldn't lift a damn finger when shit hit the fan. Mark never liked confrontation. He didn't argue, didn't fight, didn't push back, not even when life demanded it. And maybe I didn't notice that flaw right away because I was too busy making excuses for him, painting over cracks with hope and rationalization. But some cracks don't go away. They just grow wider. Then came Diane, my mother-in-law. The crown jewel of manipulation, the queen of passive aggression, the kind of woman who could weaponize a glance, a tone, a raised eyebrow. She didn't scream or throw things she didn't need to. Her words cut like scalpels. Sweet on the outside, venom in the core. You know the type. Says, bless your heart, while planting a knife square in your back. After her husband died, Mark asked if we could let her move in. Just for a little while, he said. She's lonely, she's grieving, she has no one else. I agreed. Because I was trying to be a good wife, a kind person, a decent human being. That was my first mistake. Temporary turned into a full-blown guest suite remodel, a separate pantry for her dietary preferences, and a monthly allowance that would make a Wall Street executive blush. $6,000. Every month. For what? For her comfort? For her peace of mind? Hell, I was the one who needed therapy, not her. But I paid it. I paid it without a fight. Because Mark said she gave up everything for me. And like a damn fool, I swallowed it. I told myself she was hurting, that maybe money would soften the edge of her grief, that maybe I'd earn her respect in the process. What a joke. That woman didn't want respect, she wanted power. And I was giving it to her wrapped in silk and zero-interest wire transfers. At first, I smiled through it. Cooked extra meals, let her pick the TV shows, bought her those ridiculous luxury candles she liked. I even laughed off the comments when she started calling me the working girl, like I was some kind of charity case. Some women just aren't built for homemaking, she'd say, sipping her imported tea while I packed my briefcase. I didn't clap back. I figured, what's the point? But those comments weren't just petty. They were poison. Slow-dripping poison, seeping into everything, corroding my marriage, my sense of safety, my self-worth. And Mark? He just smiled and shrugged. That's just how she is, babe. Don't take it personal. I swear to God, if I had $1 for every time he said that, I could have replaced her allowance and still had enough to retire in Hawaii. It wasn't just the money. It was the way she looked at me like I was some outsider, some inconvenience cluttering up her son's life. I'd come home from a 12-hour day, walk in with grocery bags, and she'd be sitting there in silk pajamas, scrolling on her iPad, barely acknowledging my existence. I'd hear her whispering to Mark when she thought I wasn't around, she's always working. No time for family. You should have married someone softer. But I still held on. I still gave. Still hoped she'd come around. Until one day, she dropped the bomb. She walked into the kitchen with her perfectly manicured nails, handed me a sheet of paper, and said it without blinking. I'll need 5,000 more next month. For shopping. I stared at her. Thought I heard wrong. 5,000 more. Just like that. No shame, no apology, not even a weak attempt to justify it. Just a list: designer handbags, Italian shoes, jewelry. A fucking diamond bracelet. I looked at Mark, waiting for him to laugh, to say it was a joke. He didn't even flinch. He said, "She deserves something nice." That's when it hit me like a punch to the gut. I wasn't part of this family. I was the sponsor, the donor, the walking, talking bank account. I was the goddamn side note to a relationship I thought was mine. And the worst part? I'd let it happen. I didn't say yes. But I didn't say no either. I just stood there in silence, clutching that paper while Diane sipped her tea like she'd just ordered brunch. And that silence, that one moment of hesitation, was the beginning of everything unraveling. Because silence, my friend, is its own kind of answer. And that answer would cost me more than I ever imagined. When I tell you I stood there staring at that list like it was written in a foreign language, I'm not exaggerating even a little bit. 5,000 more dollars. 5,000 more. Like it was just a casual little bump in her monthly fun money, like the 6,000 I was already handing over every damn month wasn't already bleeding us dry. I remember the way her voice didn't even flinch when she said it, like it wasn't a request, but an order from a woman who'd spent too long living in a world where people handed her everything without ever hearing the word no. The paper was printed, typed out with item numbers and brands like she was preparing an inventory list for a boutique, not a damn shopping wish list. There were designer handbags from names I couldn't pronounce without Googling, stilettos that cost more than my monthly car payment, 2 silk robes from some luxury French brand, and the cherry on top, a diamond tennis bracelet that looked like it belonged on a soap opera character, not a retired woman who spent most of her day drinking wine and watching reality shows. I held that list in my hand like it might bite me, and I looked up at her, waiting for the punchline, expecting maybe a little smirk, a raised eyebrow, something to tell me she was just playing around. But Diane didn't play. Not like that. She was dead serious. And when I asked her if she was buying her soul back from the devil or just dressing like him, she didn't even blink. Just raised her chin a little higher, like I was beneath the conversation entirely, and said, "I deserve nice things." Mark agrees. That's when I turned to my husband, hoping he'd laugh or at least look embarrassed, but he just stood there, arms crossed, shrugging like she'd just told us the weather report. No outrage, no pushback, not even a raised eyebrow. Just that same tired shrug that had become his default answer to everything uncomfortable in our lives. That shrug hit harder than her damn list. It wasn't just indifference, it was surrender. It was a man who had long ago given up any backbone, any boundaries, any sense of balance in his own household. That night, I sat him down across from me in the living room, looking him in the eye, trying to speak with the calm I no longer felt burning under my skin. I said, "This has to stop. She's bleeding us dry. This isn't just about money anymore, it's about respect." And you know what he said? "It's just money, babe. Don't make it a big deal." That line played on a loop in my head for hours after he said it. Just money. Like money didn't come from somewhere. Like it didn't come from my overtime, my early mornings, my missed dinners, my stress-induced migraines. Just money. As if the thousands of dollars flying out of our accounts every month were imaginary, or some magical inheritance that just replenished itself while we slept. It wasn't just the insult in his words, it was the way he said it, that calm, dismissive tone that made me feel like I was the problem. Like I was being difficult, dramatic, unreasonable. I looked at him across that room and realized something I should have seen months ago. I wasn't married to a man. I was married to a shadow that stood quietly behind his mother's skirt, a man who let other people lead while pretending that silence meant strength. And I know what you're thinking, why didn't I just say no? Why didn't I draw the line right then and there? God knows I wanted to. But the truth is, I was exhausted. Not just from the work or the money, but from the endless war of small humiliations, of trying to hold a household together while everyone around me acted like I was just a guest in my own home. I didn't say yes. But I didn't say no either. And that, I see now, was the real mistake. Because silence isn't just complicity, it's permission. When you say nothing, people take it as a green light. They take your silence and run wild with it, carve space out of it, build entire damn thrones from it. Diane saw my silence not as resistance but as surrender, and she treated it accordingly. I went to bed that night in a kind of numb daze, the kind where you stare at the ceiling wondering how the hell your life veered off course so far without you noticing. I could still hear Diane's voice in my head, Mark agrees. And that's what stuck with me the most. Not the price tags or the bracelet or the insult in her tone. It was that quiet approval from my husband, that silent endorsement of her entitlement. He'd rather keep her comfortable than defend the woman he built a life with. He'd rather keep peace in the kitchen than honesty in the marriage. I didn't know what I was going to do yet. I didn't have a plan or an escape route or some master revenge fantasy cooked up. I just knew something had snapped in me that night, something I wouldn't be able to put back together. Something bitter, dark, and sharp had started taking root in my chest, and I didn't know what it would grow into yet, but I knew it wasn't going to be forgiveness. And just when I thought the madness had peaked, when I thought it couldn't possibly get more absurd, the next morning proved me wrong in a way I never could have predicted. Because at 7:30 the next day, Diane walked into the kitchen holding a fucking baseball bat. There are moments in life that split you open without warning, no build-up, no warning shot, just a clean, jagged tear straight through whatever piece you've been trying to pretend still exists. That moment for me came on a gray Wednesday morning, just after breakfast, when my mother-in-law walked into the kitchen with a goddamn baseball bat. She wasn't rushing, she wasn't yelling, she didn't even look particularly angry. No, she walked in like she was carrying a cup of tea, her robe tied perfectly around her waist, her expression disturbingly calm. She tapped the bat gently on the tile floor as if testing its weight, smiling like she was about to play a Little League game instead of committing domestic terrorism before lunch. I remember blinking a few times, trying to decide if I was dreaming or maybe still half asleep. But no, this was real, painfully real, and the tension in that room turned so thick I could feel it in my throat. "I'm tired of being disrespected in my own home," she said in that syrupy voice of hers, every syllable slow and deliberate like she was reading from a prepared statement. "Her home," she said. "Not mine. Not ours. Hers." It hit me hard, that choice of words. She wasn't confused or being dramatic, she meant it. In her mind, this house belonged to her, not to the woman paying for it. Not to the woman who kept the lights on, filled the fridge, and worked 12-hour days to make sure she could lounge around in satin robes and blow $6,000 a month on facials and imported cheese. Before I could say a single word in response, before I could even inhale to begin forming the start of a sentence, she lifted the bat and sent it crashing into the side of the kitchen counter. The sound of wood on granite echoed through the house like a gunshot, followed immediately by the crash of plates and glass exploding in every direction. The pitcher of orange juice shattered, splashing across the floor, the shards scattering like confetti in some sick celebration. I didn't duck. I didn't scream. I just stood there, my brain frozen, my heart thudding like a drum in my chest, trying to piece together what the hell was happening in front of me. Mark jumped up from the breakfast table, but not in the way you'd expect, not in the way any rational, decent man would when his mother just turned the kitchen into a war zone. No, he didn't grab the bat, didn't raise his voice, didn't shield me from the flying debris. Instead, he stepped between us, not to protect me, but to block me. Like I was the one who needed restraining, like I was the threat here. "You need to calm down," he said to me, not to the woman actively destroying our kitchen with a Louisville Slugger, but to the one standing there empty-handed, stunned, soaked in orange juice, and surrounded by broken glass. That moment. I'll never forget it. Not the bat, not the crush, not the chaos, but the look in his eyes when he spoke those words. It wasn't panic. It wasn't fear. It was resignation. It was the look of a man who had made his choice a long time ago and just didn't have the spine to admit it out loud. Diane took another swing, this time knocking over the centerpiece and cracking the table's edge, sending a bowl of fruit flying across the room. Still, he didn't stop her. He didn't say a single word to his mother. He just kept his back to her and his eyes on me, as if I might somehow make things worse by reacting, by screaming, by having any kind of emotional response to the utter insanity unraveling around me. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from disbelief, from rage, from the sheer audacity of it all. I backed away slowly, my feet crunching on broken porcelain, my breath caught somewhere between a sob and a laugh. I looked at Mark, waiting, begging silently for him to do something, anything, that would tell me he was still on my side, that he saw me, that he understood the line that had just been crossed could never be uncrossed. But he didn't move. He didn't speak. He didn't even flinch when Diane slammed the bat one more time against the floor like a warning shot, just for effect. The silence between us in that moment was louder than her bat, heavier than the shattered glass, colder than the juice dripping down my ankle. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even raise my voice. Something in me had snapped, something that didn't make noise when it broke, but changed everything in its wake. I turned around without a word and walked out of the kitchen, past the chaos, past the man I thought I knew, past the woman who had declared war on my sanity with a smile on her face and a bat in her hand. I climbed the stairs in a kind of eerie calm, like I was floating just above my body, watching everything from a distance. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked around at the room I had built, the life I had tried so damn hard to protect, and realized I didn't recognize any of it anymore. This wasn't my home. This wasn't my marriage. This wasn't my life, not anymore. And that night, while the house slept in a strange, broken silence, I pulled out my suitcase and began to pack. There's a particular kind of silence that settles over you when you've finally reached the end of your rope, a silence so deep it's almost soothing, like the moment right before a storm when everything pauses, holding its breath. That's the quiet that wrapped around me as I stood in our bedroom, folding shirts into my suitcase while downstairs Diane laughed at some brainless reality show and Mark sat beside her, pretending like nothing had happened just hours earlier. No one came upstairs. No one asked if I was okay. No one noticed the way the closet was slowly emptying or how the hangers rattled softly like bones every time I slid another piece of my life off the rail. I didn't scream. I didn't slam doors. I didn't throw a single damn thing. That kind of drama would have felt too loud for the hollow emptiness settling in my chest. Instead, I moved in slow, deliberate motions, like I was packing up a body instead of belongings. Fold, zip, press, repeat. I wasn't even sure where I was going. Not really. I just knew I couldn't sleep another night under that roof, breathing the same air as a woman who thought a bat was a reasonable form of communication and a man who thought my silence meant agreement. I didn't write a note. Didn't leave a list. Just slipped my wedding ring off my finger and placed it on the nightstand like a punctuation mark at the end of a sentence that had long lost its meaning. It didn't feel like some big, dramatic gesture. It felt clinical, almost surgical. Like I was removing a tumor that had grown too deep into the skin to ignore anymore. I looked at it for a moment. Just a ring, just metal, just a circle, but it felt heavier than anything else I packed. That little band had once meant hope, promise, partnership. Now it just looked like a failed contract between two people pretending not to see the cracks in their foundation. I didn't leave because I was scared. I left because I was done. And there's a dangerous power in that kind of clarity, a quiet fury that makes you stop asking for decency and start preparing for war. Because I wasn't just leaving, I was gathering my weapons. You see, when a woman has given everything she has, when she's poured herself out in silence for years only to be handed a shattered glass in return, she doesn't walk away empty-handed. She walks away with every receipt, every document, every thread of truth she's been too polite to pull until now. That night, I sat on the bed with my laptop, not crying, not grieving, just clicking. I logged into our shared accounts, our joint investments, our business documents. I checked files I hadn't looked at in months, files Mark swore he was handling, paperwork I'd been too tired to question because I'd trusted him to take care of what we'd built together. But as I opened each folder, each spreadsheet, each transaction report, something in me started to shift. Because buried beneath all the expected numbers were a few strange anomalies, consulting fees that didn't match any actual consultants, transfers to vendors I'd never heard of, luxury purchases listed as office decor, and a handful of credit card charges that traced right back to Diane's shopping sprees. She hadn't just been spending the allowance I gave her, she'd been dipping into our business accounts, laundering her greed through fake invoices and phantom services, all under my nose while smiling across the dinner table like butter wouldn't melt in her mouth. And Mark? Well, Mark had been signing off on half of it. Whether he knew what he was approving or not, I didn't care. Ignorance isn't innocence, not when you're playing with someone else's sweat and blood. It wasn't just betrayal, it was theft. But the real kicker was how easy it had been to uncover once I stopped looking at my marriage through rose-colored glasses and started reading the fine print. I downloaded everything. Every receipt, every statement, every little damning detail. I backed it all up twice, once on a hard drive, once in the cloud under a secure account he didn't even know existed. I wasn't planning a confrontation. I wasn't going to storm downstairs and scream about the lies and the fraud. That would have been too easy for them. No, I wanted them to sit in the same silence I had. I wanted them to wake up thinking they'd won, only to realize they'd just been outplayed by the woman they thought was too soft to push back. I made a few calls, quiet ones. A lawyer I trusted, a financial advisor I hadn't spoken to in years, and an old friend who knew exactly how to interpret the kind of paper trail I had just uncovered. I wasn't looking for revenge in that moment. I was looking for clarity. But revenge has a funny way of creeping in when you start picking up the pieces of your own life and realize how many people tried to break them on purpose. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't need to. I sat in the dark, sipping cold water, watching the light of my laptop screen glow across the wall like the flicker of a slow-burning fire. I had no interest in dramatic goodbyes or final words. People like Diane don't hear words, they hear consequences. And people like Mark don't respond to emotion, they respond to silence that's been sharpened into action. So I zipped my last suitcase closed, put on my coat, and walked out without looking back. No note, no slammed door, no confrontation. Just absence, a vacuum where I used to be. And by morning, they'd wake up to a house missing more than just my presence. Because when I walked out that door, I didn't just take my clothes, I took the foundation they were standing on. At exactly 7 in the morning, the first crack in their little fantasy world began to form, though neither of them realized just how deep it would run until the minutes started stacking into hours. And every piece of their comfort began slipping through their fingers one painful inch at a time. Diane woke up first, wrapped in her silk robe, probably expecting her usual cup of coffee waiting for her downstairs and the smell of eggs frying in the pan, a ritual she never lifted a single finger to contribute to. But that morning, she was greeted by something far less indulgent, a quiet that rang louder than any alarm, a stillness that held a tension you could cut with a knife. No coffee, no breakfast, no me, just silence thick enough to taste, and if she had even an ounce of awareness, she would have known in that moment that something had shifted in the atmosphere of that house. But knowing Diane, she probably just chalked it up to laziness or forgetfulness, some minor inconvenience in a life built on the backs of other people's labor. She shuffled into the kitchen, expecting her daily dose of comfort, only to find the counters cold and clean, the fridge untouched, and the only sound in the room was the quiet hum of the appliances. The ones she never bothered to touch unless it was to complain that the sparkling water wasn't cold enough. She pulled out her phone, likely thinking she'd just order her breakfast through her favorite overpriced delivery app, something artisanal, something stupidly expensive and utterly tasteless, and that's when the first real blow landed. Her credit card declined. Not once, not twice, but on every single transaction she tried to process. Confused, she probably tried again, thinking it was a tech glitch or a signal issue, something temporary and meaningless. But the more she tapped, the worse it got, until finally the app flashed an alert, payment method invalid. Then came the texts. Fraud alerts. Security warnings. Notification after notification pouring in like a dam had broken. Accounts frozen. Funds inaccessible. Credit limits pulled back so tightly the plastic in her wallet might as well have turned to dust. I can almost picture her face in that moment, eyes wide, fingers trembling, trying to make sense of a world that had always said yes, suddenly screaming no in her face. And as she stood there, panic bubbling under that practiced exterior of calm entitlement, Mark's phone started ringing. The bank, the accountant, the firm managing our investments, all calling with urgent updates, none of which he was remotely prepared to understand, let alone explain. And that's when it really hit them. This wasn't a glitch. It wasn't a random fluke. It wasn't someone else's mess. This was orchestrated. This was personal. This was the sound of me reclaiming everything they thought I'd walk away from. Because everything I did was legal. Everything was documented. Everything filed, signed, stamped, and backed up in 3 different places. I didn't take what wasn't mine. I just took back what they tried to steal while smiling through their teeth. I used my rights. I used the law. I used every ounce of intelligence they pretended I didn't have, and I did it with the same quiet calculation they never thought I was capable of. Every dollar that left those accounts had a trail. Every fraudulent invoice had a signature. Every business transfer had a timestamp. And every last one of them led right back to Diane and Mark. While Diane stood in the kitchen, frozen in her self-inflicted chaos, Mark finally tried to call me. The first call went unanswered. The second one too. On the third, I let it ring just long enough for him to feel like maybe I'd pick up, like maybe he still had a chance to explain, to beg, to fix this somehow. Then I declined the call, sent one single text in reply, just 10 words that carried more weight than anything I'd ever said during our marriage. You let her swing a bat. I swung a goddamn hammer. We're even. I didn't follow it up with threats or demands. I didn't spell out everything I'd done because, frankly, the silence said enough. Let them sit in their confusion. Let them scramble through paperwork and empty accounts trying to figure out how one woman who used to make their coffee managed to flip the entire table without raising her voice. Let them taste the helplessness I'd been swallowing for years in that house, the bitter sting of realizing you underestimated the wrong person for far too long. And yet, even as I watched their empire begin to crumble from a distance, even as I heard from my lawyer that the financial audits had triggered deeper investigations and the firm's internal review was already underway, I didn't feel the kind of satisfaction people always talk about when they get revenge. What I felt was colder, sharper, something closer to relief mixed with a strange kind of grief. Not grief for what I lost, but for the years I wasted, for the time I can't get back, for the woman I used to be before I let myself be buried under someone else's entitlement. But I wasn't finished yet. Because revenge isn't just about burning bridges, it's about making sure the people who set the fire have no way to build new ones. And what I had planned next would ensure they'd be haunted not by what I took, but by the realization that they handed me the matches and dared me to strike. It was a week after I walked out of that house, just 7 days since I left behind the echo of shattered plates and the cold stare of a man who once promised me forever. When I sat across the polished mahogany desk of a lawyer I hadn't spoken to in years, but always kept in my back pocket, just in case life ever twisted hard enough to make me call in the professionals. He was calm, precise, and more than a little amused by the stack of documentation I handed him, file after file of carefully organized receipts, forged invoices, bank transfers, and all the digital breadcrumbs leading directly to Diane's greedy little fingers. We went through everything slowly, methodically, like 2 surgeons dissecting a tumor that had been growing unnoticed for far too long. Every charge was tied to a fake service, every transaction dressed up in business jargon to disguise what was, in essence, straight-up theft. And the cherry on top? Mark's signature, sprawled across half those documents like a man signing away his soul without even realizing he'd lit the fuse on his own downfall. I remember the way my lawyer leaned back in his chair, smiling just slightly, tapping the papers with his pen before saying, in the calmest voice possible, "This isn't just divorce material. It's criminal." He said it so casually, like he was talking about the weather, not the potential felony charges hanging over the heads of the 2 people who thought I'd just walk away quietly and disappear into the background like a good little wife. And for a moment, I let myself imagine it, taking them both down in court, Diane in a courtroom trying to explain designer handbags and fake invoices to a judge who wouldn't be swayed by her smug smile. Mark sitting beside her realizing too late that the cost of his silence had finally come due. But I didn't press charges. Not because they didn't deserve it. God knows they did. But because I'd already taken more from them than a courtroom ever could. They didn't know what was coming next. They didn't know if I had more evidence, more leverage, more allies in the shadows ready to drag everything further into the light. And that uncertainty, that silence hanging over their heads like a guillotine, was worth more than any legal sentence. Sometimes silence doesn't just sting, it poisons. It crawls into the cracks of people's minds and festers, turning paranoia into punishment, doubt into disease. They didn't know if I'd come back swinging or if I'd simply vanish forever, leaving behind nothing but a trail of chaos and a bank account stripped clean. They didn't know if the next knock on the door would be a process server, a private investigator, or just a ghost from the life they ruined. And that not knowing, that is what I gave them in return for every insult, every ignored plea, every moment I spent swallowing my own damn voice just to keep a peace they never once earned. Because in the end, I didn't want money. I didn't want restitution or revenge dressed up in court documents and judges' orders. I wanted peace, the kind that comes not from justice served, but from knowing you finally walked away before the fire consumed every last piece of you. The kind of peace that comes from reclaiming yourself in full, from peeling off the labels they pinned to your back and tossing them into the wind. I didn't need to see them punished. I just needed to know they'd never feel safe in their comfort again. Now I wake up alone, but not empty. I make my own coffee, fill my own silence, decorate my own space with colors that feel like mine again. I walk through my days without glancing over my shoulder, without waiting for a passive-aggressive comment or a dismissive shrug to derail my entire mood. And every now and then, when I check my inbox or get a new voicemail from some unknown number, I smile a little, wondering if it's Mark trying again, hoping I'll pick up, hoping I'll let him explain what cannot be explained. But I never do. I don't need to. My silence is louder than anything he could ever say. And maybe you're wondering if I regret it, if I miss him, if I ever think maybe I took it too far. I don't. Because when someone lets you bleed while pretending to hold the bandage, they don't deserve your guilt. They deserve your absence. They deserve the weight of a silence that never answers, never comforts, never softens. So now I live my life quietly, freely on my terms. And every so often, when I walk past a baseball bat hanging in a store or see one resting on a porch during a summer evening, I feel a strange sense of calm. Not fear. Not anger. Just a quiet, knowing smile. Because funny thing about bats, once you survive the first hit, you never fear the swing again. And maybe you're sitting there, listening to this and thinking, what would I have done in her place? Would I have walked away like she did, clean and cold, or would I have burned it all down, scorched earth and no survivors? That's the thing about justice, it wears different faces for every person. So tell me, honestly, what would you have done? Would you have chosen silence? Or would you have swung your own hammer? I'd love to hear your version of justice.